tomorrow's a big day for the Mets, so let me put my headset on here, and we will check in with Eddie C. and see what he's doing and what he's up to. Eddie, welcome. How are you?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Good, thank you. All right, Eddie, are you surprised it's Rojas?
No, not exactly. When it got down to this group and this time, not exactly. I didn't think, going outside with Eduardo Perez was probably the way they were going to go, and they think very highly of Luis Rojas. They did in the previous incarnation when Carlos Beltran got the job, and his name was still there. He's well known. I think familiarity played a big role in this, not only his familiarity with the players being on the staff last year, but also them being familiar with him. So I'm not shocked by it. It is surprising. He's 38 years old, never managed in the bigs. A lot of people don't know who the heck he is, but in that regard, it's surprising. But honestly, when they got down to this grouping, I kind of figured it might be him.
Eddie, no one's around this team more than you are, and you've been around it longer than anybody out there except the play-by-play guys. That you've been around it forever. I mean, you started covering a team 25 years ago or more, so you've been there day in and day out through every bit of stuff. It's going to be painted that the Mets had two swings at this and still went with the untested guy because they want a puppet. That's what Brody wants. That's what they want. How is he going to handle that premise?
I think he's going to be fine. I really do. I like Luis an awful lot. Again, that's going to be the perception, and it's something that he's probably going to have to deal with, and it may be for a while until he can, exercise his chops and prove that he's a good manager. And we don't know that at this point, Mike. There's no way to know that. He's never managed a major league game, but he has managed. And I think, he's a little bit ahead of the game in that regard. But, listen, I don't think there's any question that Brody Van Wagenen feels pressure because of last year and what happened last year. The Steve Cohen ownership to be kind of hanging over the team. This was a choice that, he felt he had to make if he wants to stay involved in things, and I think he will stay involved in things. So, but I don't think that's going to bother Luis at all. I really don't. I think he incorporates an awful lot of things, into his daily routine, and the players like him. I think there's mutual respect back and forth. He's had a lot of these players, so I don't think it's going to be a problem for him, really.
How important is the Cano role on the team, and what kind of impact will Cespedes have on this team?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the Cano, obviously the relationship that you have with Cano is going to be key. I think that's with anybody. That was
and Cano will be helpful to him. There's no question.
Yeah,
I have no question. So. Cespedes could be an issue. We know that Cano will be helpful, but how much? What do you think the Cano role will be this year? Will it be elder statesman, play half the time, or does he want to play every day? What do you think? What do you think Robbie wants?
I think Robbie wants to play. I think if Robbie's here and he feels he's healthy, that he wants to play. I think it was a frustrating year for him last year. I think he felt that he proved something.
Well, he looked like Robbie after the All-Star break. He did.
Yeah.
He hit well. His OPS was over 900 for the second half.
Yeah, and I think that tells you right there that he expects to be out there virtually every day. That in itself, I think, the two guys that you mentioned, I think, may be a problem as things go on for this Mets team, depending on how they produce, because Cano's going to want to be out there every day, and that Cespedes is going to want to be out there every day. He's already stated he wants to play 140 games. I'm not quite sure what the role is going to be because we haven't even seen him at this point, other than the videos he sent out himself, the self-promoting videos. So I got to see from my own eyes whether he can play the outfield, but. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how Rojas and the Mets as a team balance this whole thing.
How much – listen, you have always sung the praises of DeGrom. This has been DeGrom's team. Mm-hmm. Now Alonso's done what he's done, and he's a position player who's got personality, and he became a leader last year. Does this morph into Alonso's team – into Alonso's team, or does he wait and it remains DeGrom's team?
Well, I think he probably waits a little while. This will be Alonso's team in time. I think anytime you have a position player of his stature, and I assume that he's going to continue to get better. I don't know if he's going to hit 53 home runs again.
No.
Who knows? But, I think he's going to be a good player. He works hard, and he's a great kid. So I think it will be his team eventually. I think he will always, in deference to Jake, step aside for him as he should. Jake is older. He's been around longer. He's a two-time Cy Young Award winner. But I don't think there'll ever be any friction between the two. I think it's still Jake's team. He is the leader. I think when, something has to be said or something has to be done, I think people look to Jake. Eventually they'll look to Pete, but I think that's going to be fine. That will morph, I think, over time.
How do you feel about, will they make any adjustments or any moves with the staff, or will they leave the staff that they expected to take into the season with Beltran?
I think it's too late at this point. I think everybody that's here is going to remain here. I think it would be cruel, to say to just about anybody on this staff, hey, thanks very much, but we're going to go in another direction because Rojas is the manager.
So he inherits a whole staff here.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, I mean they're going to have to find somebody to fill his role. I don't know if it's good. I think they'll probably branch out a little bit and do that role a little bit differently. It may not be quality control coach like he was last year, but basically he kind of shuttled the analytics between the front office and the players. It may be the same type of role, maybe phrased differently. I don't know. But, yeah, I mean, basically it's a little bit tough in that regard because he doesn't have his people. This was interesting, Mike. Last year I was talking to Luis toward the end of the year because he was asked, one of my favorite players of all time, regardless of where he played, but he was with the Mets for a while, was Moises. I loved Moises, and we always got along very well. So he was asking me when Moises was up for interviews with San Diego, what I thought and whether, it would be a good thing. And Moises didn't want to interview and didn't want to be a manager. I actually thought, I wondered if Luis would ask Moises to join the staff. And maybe in the future he would, but right now I think, the staff is set, and I think everybody's going to be remain in place as they should at this late date.
And he and Moses are half brothers, I believe, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah,
right.
They are.
I know Felipe Lou had a lot of kids. I know he has a lot of kids.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
And that's, another thing, just with mentioning Felipe, and I always thought the world of Felipe.
Felipe Lou's a classy guy, man. Really classy
and
a
great player, and also a very good manager.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
And Luis was around. He was around. He's been around baseball for a long time. It's kind of like Pat Mahomes' kid, who we're watching now.
Yep.
Take his team to the Super Bowl. That kid used to wear a Met uniform and throw balls on the side. I remember him when Pat was with the team back in 2000. So Luis was the same way. He was around baseball and has been around baseball all his life. He thinks it, he sleeps it, he eats it. He's a good guy, and I think he's going to do fine. I really do.
Was this close or was this him? I mean, was there anybody else that was in the running deep once the whole Beltran thing happened, or was it just him?
I think it was him. I think they thought a little bit about Dusty Baker. I do think that they kicked that around a little bit, but I do think they realized that regardless of what they thought about Dusty and whether he could have an impact here and be a good manager, if you look at the time frame that was left, you're basically looking at 3 weeks before spring training, and to try to bring a guy in, and a veteran guy like that who obviously has not been in the Mets system and would have to get up to speed, I think it was a lot to ask. Plus, he'd have an entire staff already there. I don't think Mullins would have been a problem as a bench coach. He knows Bam Bam very well, but they did consider Dusty, but I think that was brief, and I think they just moved on and felt that Luis was the right fit here, especially with the time frame that they were constrained by.
There's no question. We're talking about Eddie Coleman tomorrow. The Mets. It's a big day in New York. We say goodbye to Eli at 11. They say hello to the manager at 3. I don't remember a day where that's happening like that. I mean, that's
wild.
Yeah, that's a wild day and a very unquiet January day, as a matter of fact. There's no there's no question that the bullpen is critical and very unsettled. I don't know that if Rojas has his own thoughts about the bullpen or he's going to take marching orders about the bullpen. But to me, that is, I mean, you could say, Alonso has to do this or McNeil has to do this. this bullpen has to work. And you took a big chance with Diaz. You brought in Betances.
Big plus.
Yeah, no question. I mean, Betances got a great ability, but this is a very, very unsettled bullpen right now. And the Mets are going to have plenty of leads in the seventh inning, as we know, and they got to win those games. So what do you think? I mean, do you have any idea what Rojas is thinking about the bullpen, and does it differ at all from what everybody else has been thinking?
No, I don't think it. I don't think it does. I do think that Diaz is going to be the closer here. I think that Betances will set him up, and Familia and Lugo and others. They do have a number of guys. I think what helps, there are two things to me with the bullpen. Number one, you're asking for a lot of bounce back, okay, and that can be tough. But I guess if there is a position in baseball where you look and see a lot of bounce back, you do see it in the relief corps, and they need bounce back.
Do you see Lugo as a reliever too?
I do. Yeah, I do, because they're, right now, the way that they went about the off season, and I know they needed depth, but they signed both Porcello and Waka, and both those guys expect to be on this team. It's not like they signed Michael Waka and he's going to be real happy going down to AAA. Now, I'm not saying that may not happen, but he wants to reestablish himself, and Porcello does too, for that matter. So they do have a 26 guy this year, so you can add another guy to the bullpen.
Yep.
But somebody is going to have to go to the pen. Be it Steven Matz or Waka, it's probably not going to be Porcello, but somebody's going to have to go there. But they do have depth in the pen. They're asking for a lot of bounce back. I think that it's possible, obviously. I can't believe that Diaz is going to be as bad as he was last year. I don't know how you can go from 57 saves to what he went through last year. I think there's some bounce back there. Familia, we'll see. I don't know. But I think Betances kind of steadying the ship, if he's healthy, and I hope he is, I think that helps an awful lot to have an anchor like that guy, and as good as he is, if he's the old Betances.
Did the players I know that the Mets waited until they're going to talk to the commissioner, and I'm sure they got an earful, and that was the end. Because I know the theory was that if they got any information that was damning on Beltran when they met with the commissioner, that was it. And It sounds like they did.
Yep.
But you also heard that the players were grumbling a little bit, especially the pitchers. You think they had any impact in this thing?
No, I don't think so. I honestly don't. The curious thing to me with the whole Beltran thing was why the Mets didn't
talk to him after it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. But the thing is that to me, and again, if the Mets really believed in Beltran, and there were a lot of people in the organization, I think, that believe he could be a special manager. But if they felt that way, they should have got out in front of this a little bit better. That's never been a Mets forte. I think you know that, Mike.
Right. No, they wait to see which way the wind blows.
Exactly.
That's what they do. But I had been told that if they got any information that was damning from the commissioner, he was gone. And and I think that's what happened, is that they got an earful. And that was it.
I mean, Manfred put Beltran's name and put it out there for a reason. The other guys were, bench coach, manager, the general manager, and then Carlos Beltran, the only player. So there was a reason he was out there. He was intrinsic in what was going on in Houston. I don't think there's any question. And Manfred wanted to spell that out as well too. My only question is from say November to when that report came out. The Mets said constantly that they wanted to let baseball go through their process and figure it out. But at some point, do you either talk to somebody in the commissioner's office and say, hey, what do you have on Beltran? Or sit down with Beltran and say, look, be totally honest with us here. We can't get ambushed or sideswiped.
I agree with both. I agree with the premise. I know they didn't talk to. They weren't. It wasn't a topic when he first got the job. But once the shoe fell, they should have said, "Hey, what the heck's going on here?"
Exactly. Especially given his. Listen, I think all of us know how special Beltran is at picking up tells, seeing things from other pitchers, hitters, etc. That's a forte. It's been an amazing forte of his. And when you're dealing with something like this, where you've got a whole system together that they're using video monitors, etc., there's a very good chance that he's involved in that. Okay, so I think they didn't do their due diligence. Let's put it that way. And they could have done a better job in that regard, and they might have avoided, going through what they went through here in the last week or so.
From what you can sense, since you've been around the Mets since the big announcement about where ownership is headed, do you already see anything, or does it feel any different, or at all? Does anything act any different?
No, it's hard. It's kind of hard to judge. We were over there the other day for kind of a beat luncheon, beat writers luncheon, and people who are around the team, the radio and TV people are around the team all the time, and I think it weighs on them a little bit. That's just my sense that that's kind of lurking in the background. When we asked about it, basically the answer comes back the same every time. We're proceeding with business as usual. Okay, there's really nothing else they can do. They don't want to comment on it, but I think it's lurking there. It's kind of like the elephant in the room. You know that there is a guy with a lot of money that is ready to step in here if approved, and I assume he's going to be approved.
He's going to be approved. They never would have gone this far down the road. He was already a minority guy, and his troubles are behind him with the SEC. He paid his fines, so I mean all that stuff is over with. So they are. Listen, they would never have gone this far if he wasn't going to be approved. So that's that's a given that he's going to be approved.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. So I think that kind of lurks over there. They've stayed away from commenting on it. I understand it. I get it. And there's probably not going to be a heck of a lot said until he's approved, and then the story will crop up again. Okay, then all right, if approved, then when is he going to step in here with and wield his money? I mean, Jeff and Fred supposedly are here, in theory for the next 5 years, but that doesn't mean that Cohen's money is not going to come in and have an influence on this team before then. That's for sure.
No question. And so did you get any feedback at all that was different from the players about Rojas? Anything that was, or was it all very positive?
No, not really. It's been positive, Mike. I just texted with a couple of them. Like a lot of them are going to be in this weekend. There's a fan fest on Saturday. DeGrom is going to be here because he's getting an award for the baseball writers dinner. McNeil and several others are going to be here over the weekend. So we'll get more of a chance, I think, to talk to some of the guys. But a lot of these guys, like Alonso, has already tweeted the fact that he was ecstatic about it because he had him as a Double-A manager. So did McNeil. He managed Binghamton for a couple of years and managed quite a bit in the system. He also managed in the Dominican, so he managed major leaguers there. It's a funny story too that David Bell, who's been known to go off a little bit, as you know, he was the manager of a team in the Dominican, the Winter League, and he was dismissed. I'm not quite sure. I think he had a tirade and they threw him out of the league or whatever. And Luis took over the team. And then they brought him back the next year and he won a championship with them. So, like I said, he's got some chops. And
do you know him fairly well, Rojas?
Yes, I do. I'll tell you a funny story about Luis. And this was years back, and I can't remember the year, but this was when he was with the minor leagues. I think he was managing the Gulf Coast League teams at the time, but they had him around as working in spring training or whatever. But he came to me and he introduced himself, and I didn't even know him at the time, Luis Rojas. He says that I know my name is different. He says, but I'm the half brother of Moises, and Moises had told him to seek me and just say hello because but I always had a good relationship.
Yeah, I like Moses too. Moses was my neighbor. He lived right near me here. He lived right out here where I am.
Great guy. Yes. Great guy. And I'll tell you another funny story too. Quickly, he is a hell of a basketball player. I mean, and I mean
who Rojas?
Rojas. We had early on in spring training, when time is a little more free, they have pickup.
And Eddie used to be good, folks. I'm telling you, a couple of years ago. But Eddie used to be good. He was.
This is actually when I could run up another court. I can't do that anymore. I can only walk, and that's barely. But anyhow, we used to play a little bit pickup games or whatever, and I always made it a point to try to get on Luis's team because I knew if you wanted to stay on the court, this is as competitive a guy as you want. I mean, he takes over games, and he he stayed on the court continually all night. I mean, that's how good a basketball player is.
And
so
how do you think he handles New York? They say he's a good communicator, right?
He is a great communicator. He speaks both languages fluently. I think people are going to like him. I really do. Listen, if you get off to a bad start, nobody's going to like him, okay?
Right.
And it's going to come down on his head, and he knows that because he's unproven. And if they get off to a tough start, it's going to be rough. But if they play like they think they can, I think that he will be okay, and I think New York will like him. I don't think he's going to be snowed by anything in the dugout or any game situation. You never agree with everything that a manager does, but he handles situations very well, and I think they like that about him. He thinks quick. He's a good listener, very good listener, so I think that's important too. And I think people are going to like him. I really do. In
closing, is this on Brody, the Beltran thing, or was he a victim of circumstances here?
Boy, tough to say. A little, kind of a little of both. I do think it's on him. Like I said before, I do think it's on the Mets. I think they could have done their due diligence better, get ahead of things. They never do that very well. I think they have to take the hit for that. So Brody, again, he's the front man, so you got to take the hit for that. But I can't blame him entirely. I do think this, ambushed him a little bit. I think he had good intentions going in with Beltran. I think a lot of people felt that Beltran could be a special guy, a special manager. But again, you're getting an unproven guy in the dugout, but a guy who has at least managed more than Carlos Beltran has, that's for sure. And even though people don't know him, I don't think the credit. The interesting thing with Beltran is instant credibility when you walk into a clubhouse. That Luis Rojas doesn't have that, but I don't think it's that far behind.
He doesn't have that gravitas that Beltran had. No.
You're right, but I don't think he's that far behind. People like him. He's a likable guy, and he's not a panderer at all. He's going to tell you what he feels. So I think people will like him and respect him, and I think he'll be okay.
The other part of this is because the Mets are going to see a lot of Joe Girardi this year. I mean, and he's going to be right in their face. They could have had him. It was no secret they could have had him. Joe would have taken that job. We all know that.
Yeah.
I mean, he made that pretty clear that he would have taken it. So he's going to be right in their face with a dangerous team, and he's a good manager, as we know, and he's going to be right there, right in front of them, front and center all year.
Yeah, it's going to me, it's fascinating, Mike, because I think, I'm just looking on paper right now. I think the Mets are a better team than the Phillies.
I think
overall.
They ought to, especially in the pitching department.
Right, exactly. But it'll be interesting to see what Girardi gets out of that team to make up the difference, and maybe he can. I think he is that good a manager.
He is a very good manager.
Is Joe a guy who can deliver you 4 to 5 wins a year? I think so.
Yes.
I think he
handles his bullpen very well.
Yeah, he does, and so that's fascinating to watch. But I do think that the Mets are better. Maybe Joe can make up some ground, but it will be 19 times a year. I know it's going to be a lot. It'll be fun.
I heard Riggleman talking about him the other day, and he was talking about Rojas very complimentary.
Yeah.
And I know you and I both like Riggleman a lot, and Riggleman was being very complimentary about what a solid baseball guy Rojas was. So he did Rojas. We know what kind of guy Riggleman is. He wouldn't throw him under the bus, but he was saying nice things about him. He really was.
But I think, and honestly, I thought I was listening to that too, Mike, and I think that speaks volumes too, because Jimmy he's an old school baseball guy, and he knows that analytics are creeping into the game, and the younger guys are taking over, and he doesn't suffer fools gladly. Okay, so when he speaks highly about Rojas, I pay attention. I think that was a pretty good feather in his cap to have Jim Riggleman talk about him that way, and I don't that. None of that was BS either. Listening to him, he's a good man. I think he's going to be. I think he may surprise some people. So we'll see.
All right, Eddie. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You got it, Mike.
All
Good
right.
talking to you.
Eddie C. Who'll have a busy day tomorrow. He'll be out there with the Mets.